Stop thinking about this like a headline. Think about it like a diagram. Because here's the shocking claim that makes everything else click. The US. Military isn't sitting inside Iran's strike geometry by accident. It's there because the global system has been engineered into a position where it can't reduce its footprint without triggering a financial and political reprise. In other words, what looks like a strategy is increasingly just the system performing maintenance on itself. And if you think that sounds dramatic, anchor to one modern reality. Global debt has been measured in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. Figures like roughly 250 trillion have been cited for total debt, and public debt has been described at record levels. That isn't just a big number. That's the kind of number that turns decisions into constraints. When a system reaches that scale, it stops behaving like a government with choices and starts behaving like a machine that must keep moving or stall. So when you hear US forces are within Iran's deadly missile range, don't hear breaking news. Hear stage 3 has matured. And I'm going to prove it coldly, systematically, using a fixed mechanism that shows up across empires, currencies, and security orders. Then we'll apply it to right now, step by step, until it's so obvious it feels mathematical. But first, lock this in. By the end of this video, you won't just have an opinion about what happens next. You'll have a model. And here's the open loop. Because I don't want you to just watch. I want you to track. Near the end, I'm going to give you 3 specific signals that tell you which direction the system is moving before the public narrative catches up. 3 signals. Simple. Repeatable. If you miss everything else, don't miss that. Now, the claim that most people won't say out loud: when a superpower's financial structure requires permanent expansion to stay stable, military posture stops being strategy and becomes maintenance. Not choice, maintenance, not policy, physics. That's the hidden engine behind the headlines. It's the reason pulling back is never clean. It's the reason forward bases become non-negotiable. It's why deterrence becomes a lifestyle instead of a decision. And once you see the engine, what happens next? Stops being a debate, becomes a countdown. Here's the mechanism. 4 stages, always in order, always connected, always repeating. Stage 1, the setup. A center of power builds legitimacy with a promise. Stable money, protected trade routes, security guarantees, a framework people can plan their lives around. The center becomes the organizer of order. The currency becomes the lubricant of commerce. The military becomes the lock on the door. It feels like leadership, but structurally it's dependence. The system begins to rely on the center's credibility. Stage 2, expansion. Overextension disguised as growth. More commitments, more bases, more interests, more promises, more financial issuance. The currency or debt instrument becomes a universal IOU, accepted not because it's perfect, but because the system is built around it. At first, expansion looks like strength, but the hidden shift is brutal. The center starts financing present stability by borrowing from the future. The order becomes a machine that must keep moving to avoid stalling. Stage 3, crisis. Loss of control. External shocks arrive, rivals adapt. The cost of maintaining the system rises. Credibility begins to leak. And the center responds in the only way stage 3 systems can respond. It doubles down. More enforcement, more pressure, more emergency measures, more temporary actions that never disappear. Here's the paradox of stage 3. The military footprint that once prevented conflict starts generating it, because everyone can see the center is locked into its posture. Deterrence becomes brittle. Everyone tests the fence. Stage 4, the outcome, the reprice. Risk gets repriced. Promises get repriced. The center's credibility is no longer assumed. It is negotiated, challenged, or bypassed. Sometimes stage 4 is a currency realignment. Sometimes it's an imperial contraction. Sometimes it's a sudden shock event that accelerates what was already unfolding. But the signature is always the same. The center cannot keep every commitment at the same cost, at the same time, forever. Something gives. That's the machine. Now we prove it with history, not as storytelling, as diagnostics. 3 separate systems, same 4 stages. Watch how the pattern repeats like a stamp. First case, Rome. Not Rome as a vibe, Rome as a machine. Stage 1, setup. Rome builds legitimacy through law, roads, commerce, and military dominance. The empire becomes the order provider. The promise is simple. Rome keeps the peace, and the world inside the border can trade. Stage 2, expansion. Borders expand, garrisons multiply. Political incentives reward conquest, patronage, and spectacle. The obligations grow. Military pay, grain distributions, public works lead expectations. The frontier stretches. Logistics become heavier. Corruption thickens. Local instability becomes expensive. Here's the structural trap. As an empire expands, the marginal cost of controlling the edge rises faster than the benefits of controlling one more province. You don't conquer a new border, you inherit a new problem. So Rome starts doing what stage 2 systems always do. It manipulates the medium of obligation. The coin looks the same, but the metal content shifts. It's not a conspiracy, it's accounting under pressure. It's a state trying to pay today's bills with tomorrow's credibility. Stage 3, crisis. The 3rd century hits with stacked shocks, succession chaos, civil wars, plagues, and external pressure. Confidence fractures. The belief that Rome's authority and money are stable begins to leak. So what happens? The state tries to force stability. More troops, higher taxes, more controls. But coercion cannot reverse arithmetic. The more the state squeezes, the more the economy distorts. The more the money weakens, the more military costs rise, requiring more weakening. Feedback loop. Stage 4, outcome. The system doesn't vanish overnight. It changes shape, reforms arrive, price controls, administrative restructuring, a transformed empire that no longer resembles the earlier, smoother Rome. The footprint becomes harder to sustain, the system reprices, the center's promises shrink or mutate, same 4 stages. Now, second case, Britain and Sterling. Suez as the moment the machine became visible. Stage 1, setup. Britain becomes the global organizer of trade and finance. Naval dominance, shipping lanes, imperial networks, Sterling as a settlement core. Legitimacy tied to the ability to secure commerce and enforce order. Stage 2, expansion. Commitments multiply across continents. Then 2 world wars explode the cost. Financing the wars, financing recovery, servicing obligations. And here's the hidden cost of being the platform. Once your currency and guarantees become a foundation, the world expects you to behave like a foundation. Solid, always there, never moving. Stage 3, crisis. Mid-20th century Britain confronts a structural conflict. Maintain the imperial footprint, defend the currency, and meet domestic expectations at the old level simultaneously. The math doesn't work. Pressure builds. Credibility wobbles. Then Suez, 1956. People talk about it as geopolitics, but it's also finance and credibility. It exposed a limit. Britain's capacity to act as an independent imperial enforcer was constrained by currency vulnerability and external financial pressure. The world saw the machine's stress lines. Stage 4, outcome, the reprice. Not instant collapse, recalibration. The imperial roll contracts. Sterling's position changes. Commitments narrow. Britain remains a major nation, but the previous system, global imperial maintenance, can't continue at the same scale. Same stages, different costume. Now, third case, the Soviet Union. Afghanistan as a bleeding commitment, in 1991 as the reprice. Stage 1, setup. The USSR builds a security empire, buffer states, centralized control, military prestige, ideological legitimacy. The promise is stability through power. Stage 2, expansion. Arms race demands intensify, client states consume subsidies, internal economic rigidity deepens, and the strategic posture is built to project strength. Afghanistan becomes the visible expression, a commitment meant to enforce alignment and perimeter security. Stage 3, crisis. Costs accumulate while the economic structure struggles to adapt. Credibility strains. The war bleeds resources and attention. The broader competition continues. Public confidence cracks. Elite confidence cracks. And that's the point most people miss. Systems don't fall when the public is confused. They fall when insiders stop believing the machine can pay its future bills. Stage 4, outcome. The reprice is violent. The structure cannot maintain the promises at the old cost. The end isn't merely political, it's mechanical. A system overextended beyond its economic foundation snaps back. 3 worlds, 3 ideologies, same machine. Now we apply the exact mechanism to the present, step by step. No emotion, no tribal cheering, just verification. Stage 1, setup. After World War II, the United States becomes the organizing center of the global order. Security guarantees, alliances, protected trade routes, a dollar-centered financial system. The promise is stability. Align with the system and you get access. Markets, security, settlement, liquidity. That's the foundation. That's legitimacy. And once built, it becomes self-reinforcing. Trade wants stability. Stability wants enforcement. Enforcement wants financing. Financing wants credibility. One loop feeding the next. Stage 2, expansion. Commitments multiply. Bases spread. Forward deployments normalize. The financial layer expands with issuance that supports global liquidity and domestic flexibility. The US isn't just a country at this point, it becomes the platform. And platforms don't get to take a break without consequences. So the security umbrella expands because the system's participants behave like participants. They build their plans on the assumption the platform stays online. Now stage 3, the stage we're living in, crisis and loss of control. Not one crisis, stacked crises. Debt pressure. Inflation episodes. Supply disruptions. Rival powers adapting. Regional conflicts that don't stay regional, and a rising cost of maintaining credibility. Here's the trap. In stage 3, credibility becomes expensive. The world demands proof. The system starts paying in demonstrations. More posture, more presence, more red lines, more signaling. Now connect this to the physical map. The US maintains major installations and concentrations across the Middle East, nodes that function like organs of a larger body. Air hubs, naval hubs, logistics hubs. These sites are not abstract. They are runways, ports, fuel depots, command centers, supply pipelines. They are fixed geography. Now add Iran's side of the equation, missile capability. Ballistic missile range turns geopolitics into geometry. It's not who's angry, it's what can reach what. When you have fixed bases, fixed runways, fixed ports, and your adversary has long-range precision, your footprint becomes coordinates. Not a mystery, not a theory. Coordinates. And here's the question that changes the entire conversation. Why are those coordinates there in the first place? Answer, because they are the physical expression of a credibility system. The platform cannot simply withdraw without repricing the entire regional order. Alliances, deterrence assumptions, shipping risk, and the perceived reliability of the center. But the platform also cannot remain static while the cost of credibility rises. That's stage 3. That's the trap. So when you ask US military and Iran's deadly missile range, what happens next? You're really asking, what does stage 4 look like in this cycle? Now we verify the steps like an audit. Setup, the US, built the post-war security and financial architecture. Check. Expansion. The footprint became global, commitments multiplied, and the dollar and debt engine became central to stability. Verified. Crisis. Debt loads are historically extreme, fiscal flexibility is constrained, and deterrence now sits inside an environment where fixed assets are increasingly targetable. Undeniable. Now we reach stage 4, the reprice. But listen carefully. The reprice does not mean one movie scene explosion on one night. The reprice means behavior changes because assumptions become too expensive to keep believing. Stage 4 can arrive slowly like rust, or suddenly like a snap, but it always changes the same thing, the cost of promises. So what are the most realistic forms of stage 4 here? First, dispersion. The footprint becomes more distributed, more mobile, more hardened, more redundant, not because leaders become wiser overnight, because geometry forces adaptation. If a fixed hub is increasingly vulnerable, the system tries to break the hub into smaller, harder-to-target pieces. But dispersion has a cost. It's expensive, complex, and politically harder to sustain. You can't spread out without increasing logistical burden. The machine gets heavier. Second, burden shifting. The platform leans harder on partners, proxies, regional capacity. Not ideology, arithmetic. If the center can't pay the full cost, it tries to externalize part of the cost, but partners have their own incentives. Burden sharing can create friction, and friction creates uncertainty, and uncertainty raises the price of credibility even more. Third, tightening at home. When external commitments remain heavy while fiscal constraints tighten, domestic politics turns into a fight over what gets cut and what gets protected. That friction leaks outward. Allies watch it, rivals test it, markets price it. Credibility becomes a debate instead of an assumption. Fourth, and this is the dangerous one, accidental acceleration, a misread, a rapid escalation cycle, a chain reaction nobody publicly wanted, but the system drifted toward because fixed assets, tight deterrence, and incentive pressure create a fragile equilibrium. Here's the harsh truth. Systems don't need evil masterminds to produce catastrophic outcomes. They only need incentives pointing in one direction under stress. Now, I promised you a model, not a vibe, so here's the model turned into practical prediction. If we're in late stage 3 moving toward stage 4, the most likely near-term trajectory is not total war tomorrow and not peace forever. It's escalation of systemic pressure, more brinkmanship, more demonstrations of capability, more cycles of strike and restraint, more political messaging designed to maintain credibility without triggering full catastrophe. But the margin for error shrinks, because the hotter the machine runs, the more a single shock can force repricing. And now, pattern interrupt, because I want you to feel this as a simple equation. Fixed assets plus rising precision equals rising fragility. That's it. That's the geometry of the moment. So what happens next? Watch for the system to do what stage 3 systems always do. Spend more resources to buy the same credibility, spend more posture to buy the same deterrence, spend more debt to buy the same stability. And as that cost rises, stage 4 becomes not possible, but inevitable. Now I'm going to give you the 3 signals I promised, 3 indicators that tell you which way the reprice is moving. Signal 1, Posture changes that look like routine updates, but actually change survivability. If you see dispersal of assets, redundancy buildouts, more distributed basing, more hardening language, more emphasis on mobility, understand what you're seeing. It's not a new strategy. It's the platform paying extra to remain online. That means the system is acknowledging vulnerability. Check. Signal 2. Narrative shifts from dominance to risk management. When official messaging spends more time explaining restraint, protecting shipping, de-escalation, defensive posture, and alliance reassurance, especially when paired with continued presence, that's not softness. That's the machine trying to reduce the price of credibility through words because the physical price is rising. Verified. Signal 3. Financial stress showing up as political constraint. Watch the language around budgets, aid packages, defense spending debates, and domestic trade-offs. When maintaining external commitments starts competing openly with domestic priorities, credibility becomes politicized. And once credibility is politicized, rivals don't need to defeat the platform. They only need to wait for the platform to argue with itself. Undeniable. Now we land the conclusion, the entire point of systemic revelation. The pattern is absolute. Setup leads to expansion. Expansion leads to overextension. Overextension leads to crisis. Crisis forces reprice. There is no exception clause for American exceptionalism. There is no technology that cancels arithmetic. There is no optimistic slogan that makes permanent commitments free. And there is no era in history where a global order provider kept every promise forever at the same cost. This time is different is what systems say right before they discover they're built from the same materials as every system before them. Confidence, incentives, and limits. So here is the actionable takeaway. The one thing I want you to do differently after this video. Stop consuming geopolitics as drama. Start reading it like a balance sheet with borders. Every time you see a headline like this, ask 3 questions. What commitments are becoming too expensive to maintain at the old level? What assets are fixed, and therefore targetable, in a world of cheap precision and long range? Where is the credibility gap widening? Financially, politically, militarily? If you can answer those, you will see the next stage forming before the crowd does. And now the direct call to action, because if you understand the machine, you already know why you can't afford to look away. Subscribe, follow, stay here. Because the next video is where we walk backward through the blueprint, how the machine was built, why debt and credibility force expansion, and what survival looks like when stage 4 stops being theory and starts being policy. You don't need to be afraid, you need to be early. And the only way to be early is to understand the system before it moves. So if you want the next stage, before it hits the timeline, subscribe now.